So, today, we start with the first unit, which is about the endocrine system. So, endocrine. Endo means endo, inside. And the crine part means secretion. So, the endocrine system produces things that go inside, and we'll figure out what is this inside. The system is not sort of a traditional anatomically whole system as we think about, say, cardiovascular system, which is continuous. You have blood vessels in the heart, or digestive system, which is continuous, esophagus, stomach, intestine. Does that make sense? Endocrine system is represented by a number of glands, endocrine glands. Okay? And the function of it is to regulate the functions of the body. In response to certain changes, endocrine system produces chemicals called hormones, which are released into the blood, and that's fundamental feature of endocrine organs. They release hormones into the blood or extracellular fluid, which are connected, okay? That's into the blood, and that will regulate the bodily functions. So that brings us to the reminder about the concept of homeostasis. Remember, we talked about homeostasis, or you talked about homeostasis as the dynamic equilibrium, sort of like a pendulum in the lowest point. You can move the pendulum away, but when you release it, it will eventually come back to that lowest point. Does that make sense? So the idea of endocrine glands is when a certain body parameter changes, certain endocrine gland will respond to that change and will produce a hormone. This hormone will affect, will have an effect on the body, so the change goes away. It all sounds very complicated. Insulin. Your blood sugar goes up. Insulin is released from pancreas and facilitates processes that bring blood sugar down. Does that make sense? So, the vast majority of hormones are regulated by negative feedback. Remember negative feedback? There's a change, and then there's a response that negates the change. High sugar, insulin, normal sugar. Low sugar, glucagon, normal sugar. Does that make sense? Dehydration, antidiuretic hormone, you stop peeing. You keep water inside. Okay? High blood pressure, meaning high blood volume. Atrial natriuretic peptide, you pee a lot. Does that make sense? There are some hormones that are involved in positive feedback when the change is increased, is amplified. We'll talk about those. Those are extremely rare. We'll talk about, there's like 2. Okay. So far, negative feedback is the foundational feature of the hormone regulation. Now, there is another system in the human body that responds to the changes, responds to the stimuli, and regulates the bodily functions. Which system? Which system responds to stimulus and produces the effect of some sorts? Nervous, yeah. Nervous system, right? But nervous and endocrine systems are very, very different. I mean, functionally, they kind of similar, but there are some profound differences. Here in this table, I compare them, okay? And First of all, think about what works in each system. What are the mediators of the response? In nervous system, those are neurotransmitters, which are local. So if one neuron, you have another neuron, neurotransmitters are released between those neurons. It's a local release. Electrical impulse, on electrical impulse is what releases neurotransmitters. Are we clear about that? Case of endocrine system, the response is systemic. What does that mean? Think about this. If I will poke my finger accidentally, what's going to happen? Probably this, right? My arm will jerk. And that's it. Doesn't cause profound changes in my leg, all right? When hormone is released, it is released in the blood. It automatically is delivered to the entire body. It may affect the entire body. Whether it will or not, different story. And we'll talk about how it works, but systemic response. Another thing that isn't here, but think about it. When it hurts, can you tough it out? Generally, I mean, you can, right? Okay. If, say, like normal, if I will throw something at you, your normal response will be this, okay? But if we decide that I'm going to throw a cake at you and you're going to just receive it with your face, you will be able to sit still. You can consciously control some of your nervous responses. With endocrine system, it's impossible. Think about it. If you're stressed, your cortisol levels are going to go up, and you cannot do anything about it. They're just going to go up. Okay? Or, I don't know, growth hormone. You go to sleep, your growth hormone goes up. And you can tell yourself, I'm not going to grow. I'm not going to grow. It's not going to work. You're still going to grow. It still goes up. We'll talk, there's one hormone which affects, you can consciously overcome. It's kind of funny hormone. But generally, no. If you can't tough out insulin or glucagon, there's no way they're going to be produced. Does that make sense? Site of action, we talked about it, nervous system, synapse between two neurons. Again, endocrine system can be everywhere. Look, pancreas is about right here. It will act on the muscles that can be in your leg. Make sense? What do they act upon? Nervous system. Two effectors of the nervous system are muscles and glands, right? So different types of glandular cells, muscles. Of course, I mean, neuron can signal to neuron. That's a given. The effectors are muscles and glands. In terms of the endocrine system, okay, let's talk about insulin again. Great example. Liver cells, sure. Muscle cells, yes. Neurons, can do neurons, can act on neurons, can act on fat cells. Okay, all kinds of cells can be affected. The effects are going to be different, but it will work with all different kinds of cells. And responses that come from the nervous system, they're short-lived usually, and they fast, right? Like those muscle responses, they're short-lived. Responses that are produced by the endocrine system can be very, very long-lived. And again, let's just keep going with insulin. Have you heard about insulin tolerance test? It's the way to determine if a person has diabetes or pre-diabetic condition. You drink a glass of very, very sweet water, certain dose of glucose that's calculated based on your body mass. That immediately leads to the increase in your blood glucose. You start producing insulin, and then insulin will reduce your blood glucose levels. Normal time to assess your glucose utilization is 2 hours. In a healthy person, glucose levels go back to normal in about 2 hours after the consumption of the large bolus of glucose. And it's fast. Believe me, it's fast. If we talk about stress, the effects of cortisol can be extended to weeks after the initial exposure. Does that make sense? So it's a long-lived. It is slow, fairly slow onset, but it's long-lived. Any questions so far? Now, hormones regulate organs. Kind of jumping a little bit ahead, but I will reiterate this concept again and again. Hormones act on the cells, right, in the organs. What do they interact with in those cells? When you hear the word interaction, the molecule interacts with its R word. Receptor. It's the presence or absence of a receptor that will determine whether hormone has any effect on the cell or not. Does that make sense? That's very, very, very fundamental concept here too. Okay? Now, a little bit of anatomy. Organs of the endocrine system can be primary and secondary. So primary endocrine organs are the glands that produce hormones, and that's it. Does that make sense? So these guys include, if we will go from top to bottom, they include, okay, it's hard to see on this dude, but you will see each separately. Okay, hypothalamus, somewhere there, okay, part of the central nervous system, part of diencephalon. On this picture, hypothalamus will be that, tiny yellow bead. And then immediately inferior to hypothalamus is the pituitary gland. Okay. Another part of diencephalon is epithalamus or pineal gland. And that's it with the head. Then we have thyroid, which is the largest endocrine gland in the human body. You can see on this model right here, you can see thyroid gland over here. It's in the neck. Then there's thymus. Thymus is there in the superior mediastinum. On this image, this is thymus. And then as you go from top to bottom, you go into the abdominal cavity. You see pancreas. Not on this model. So then adrenal glands. Adrenal, above the kidney. You can see them sort of in this model. Those, oh, sorry about that. Those cone-shaped structures on top of the kidneys. Those are adrenal glands. Then you go further down, and you have, in males, it's going to be testes, okay, gonads, testes. And in females, it's going to be ovaries. Okay. I failed to mention parathyroid gland. It's on the posterior dorsal side of the thyroid. I can't show you this on the model, but it's also like here. Okay. That's the complete list of primary endocrine organs. The function of these organs is to produce hormones, period. Are we clear? You must know primary endocrine organs. What is secondary endocrine organ? It has another major function, like heart. Heart pumps blood. That's its main function. It also produces hormone called atrial natriuretic peptide. Stomach, digestion, produces hormones like somatostatin and gastrin and ghrelin. Intestine produces motilin, but main function is digestion. Does it make sense? Secondary endocrine organs have another major physiological function. Am I clear about that? We're good? Any questions before we move on? You know what? Let's take a break now because it's going to be like a really important piece here and I don't want to break it up. Let's take about 15 minutes break